Welcome everyone to another AZ Ray video. Today we're going to talk about One Battle After Another, which is a very acclaimed film that is directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, PTA. He has a diverse catalog, and this film has become a very popular film right off the bat, and some people are calling it an instant classic. So let's get into it, guys. And welcome to the channel. For those of you that are new here, most of the time we end up talking about culture, and most of the time we end up analyzing different deeper themes when it comes to films, TV shows, animes, and suggestions by viewers like you and subscribers, of course. We're in our race to 500 subscribers, so please like and subscribe. We appreciate your support. All right, guys. You guys ready? Because I'm ready. There's a lot going on with this film. So let's get on to the ride and let's get into the open road. It's a big thing that we're going to talk about from the end of this breakdown. So the way we're going to break this down is first, we're going to talk about the summary. Then we're going to talk about the very complex nature having to do with race, ethnicity, and identity. Then we're going to talk about hostile architecture. Oh yeah, it's back again. I've talked about this so many times on my channel. And in the next part, we're going to talk about the global waves of protests and why they're happening and the common phenomenons that are happening. And 5, we're going to talk about some important symbols. And then the last part is going to be my conclusion and my film review. And don't worry, guys, this video is going to be spoiler free. All right, guys, let's get into it. First section, plot summary. So this film is essentially talking about a family that's trying to reconnect through chaos. They have various obstacles that are pulling them away from each other, and they're trying to find their way. We have a multi-ethnic family that's trying to survive and do what they feel is right. And we have the story of a single dad that's trying to do right by his child and right by his family, even though a lot of outside forces are essentially pulling them apart. The interesting thing about this film is that Paul Thomas Anderson's been working on this for over 20 plus years. He said he started the writing process within the 1999 and 2000. He needed time, and he was writing it through waves. He was trying to figure out the process. He was trying to work his way through it. And then eventually he found the shining light that he needed to guide his narrative through the book Vineland, written by Thomas Pynchon or Pinchot, not sure if he's French. And the story is centered off a lot of things and a lot of themes that I actually mentioned in my other video, which I talk about in Dog Day Afternoon, about the political discourse and the divisions that were happening in the 1960s. Right now we're talking about the book when I'm talking about this breakdown, but the book is centered around the country's reaction to the fact that, Nixon getting reelected, and then the economy is being affected. We see the U.S. moving away from the counterculture movement against civil rights. And we see this transition that we thought was for the better, but it's actually for the worse. And we have this over police, over authoritarian government that's taking hold. And we have this pervasion of mass media that's taking over and manipulating the world and dividing people. And then it seems like the book is trying to depict people trying to survive in this motherless world. So that kind of gives you some kind of background and the different themes that the movie is trying to rely on. And a lot of these themes are repeating themselves all over again. We'll get into this a little bit more in the next sections, but just to kind of give you an idea of the plot and all the connections that we see within this book that help ground Paul Thomas Anderson's process, which is beautiful and powerful. He also highlights and recommends viewers check out various films that also helped him out with the process, like The French Connection, Vanishing Point, Unforgiven, Running on Empty, directed by Sidney Lumet. We're a fan of him in this channel. The final takeaway you need to get about this film, that it's essentially a modern Western. And that alone, because it's a modern Western, it has a lot of complex cultures and identity due to the region and the proximity of the film, especially since most of this film takes place in California, and California alone has a very complex relationship with different historical ties with different countries, different ethnicities. And we see this complex nature, this complex battle. What ends up happening is that there's this avalanche of events, and people are trying to fight their way up and see what ideal or what way of living is going to supersede others because unfortunately in a multicultural place it creates all these different tensions, unfortunately, because most of the time it's diversity that creates conflicts. I wish this wasn't the case, but it is the case. And we're going to dive into that by observing these deeper issues in the next section. The next section, we're going to talk about the complex nature of race, identity, and ethnicity. Brubaker is a researcher that dives deep into race and identity. And what he talks about is about identity entrepreneurs and the political, religious, and military leaders that promote their worldview and their way of seeing identity. Unfortunately, identity and ethnicity are formed by the people in power. Most of the time, the people don't choose to be how they're labeled, essentially. Like when you fill out a job application, when you fill out something for school, when you fill out important forms where you have to decide which box to check. It becomes a complicated process and it becomes like a real cause of struggle. And unfortunately, in these cases, the state often mobilizes against these people and it becomes a complex war of propaganda, state power, and whatnot. And that also ties into the whole concept of the melting pot. This applies to a lot of various countries like the UK, France, and the US, and even recently Japan, that has a concept of the melting pot and different cultures. The melting pot thing never really happened. It's just the concept, right? Nothing really got fully assimilated, right? It's never been fully welcomed, right? Because the stories of assimilation don't often apply to people of color. People of color, of African descent, people of Native American descent, Pacific Islander descent, Southeast Asian descent, Middle Eastern descent, Indian descent, Pakistani descent. They have all these different experiences and they weren't able to fully melt or be assimilated to the culture. And this ties in with the conflicts of multiculturalism. And we see that essentially what multiculturalism is that multiculturalism is the idea that immigrant children and immigrant parents are transitioning from different cultures. We see, let's say, an immigrant family. Let's say they're from Slovenia, right? So they bring their Slovenian culture to wherever they immigrate from. But the children are representing the new place, but they're still trying to hold on to their place. And most of the time, those things aren't appreciated when those things are quote unquote assimilated. We see historians break down these different examples of how it's hard to form these ideas of nation state, these ideas of like nationalistic cultures. We see that even in regions like in France, that most of the time what people do are cultural practices and actions done on the local city and the local towns and compared to the actual things of the bigger states. So most of the time we live in these imagined communities. These imagined communities are a concept that were talked about Benedict Anderson. Benedict Anderson is a political scientist, and he talks about how most of the time we have these imagined communities around us where we live. We think that like our neighbors or the people within our community are like-minded like us and they share our same ideals. Even though we've never actually met them, we think we have these imagined communities that play a role in to shape the world around us. So we have these complex issues of multiculturalism. And what I just stated right now in imagined communities, as well as the melting pot situation, we have all these converging together. And unfortunately, they don't create a beneficial situation. These are just observations of the complex struggles when it comes to identities. Often when it comes to race and culture, on a small level, we have local communities and states and nations all playing different roles in the way people are defined. And we see how these different divisions unfortunately create conflicts. We see the Rwanda genocide that happened in 1994 with the Hutus and the Tutsis. And we also see the disintegration of Yugoslavia that led to the Bosnian War, which was Catholic Croats against Orthodox Christian Serbs, Bosnian Muslims. All this happened around 1992 to 1995. And we see this this complexity that happens because people are having these unequal experiences because the melting pot in these situations are also not working. The blending isn't working. The multiculturalism is creating divisions. You and I both know that race isn't a real thing. It's not a biological thing. Yes, it's a thing that creates conflicts, but we're all humans, right? And all that we're seeing is different results of different phenotypes, things related to like our melanin, and that's what creates different skin types. But when it comes down to it, the deeper cultural issues, ethnic diversities, and these bigger institutions of power create these divisions and unfortunately foster these conflicts. And there's also a question that I have for you guys. Leave a comment below. Do you think inequality is a byproduct of human nature? Do you think there's always going to be inequality? I don't have an answer to that. It's a hard question to answer. I don't know if I have the answer to it. I like to think that we don't. I like to think that we can all seek and strive for equality with compassion and tolerance. But it seems like an uphill climb. What do you guys think? This is the other problematic thing about ethnicity. Talking about the complex nature and how these people get divided and they're trying to assimilate, they're just trying to go on their daily lives. But these ethnicities are often defined by the people in power. We have places like in China that has over 56 different minority groups. But are they given access to the benefits of those divisions? No, they're just being labeled and separated, and the people in power are creating those labels. And this is the other thing where it gets complicated too, right? Ethnicity is hard to follow. Literature such as Stokes talks about the complex nature with identity when it comes to ethnicity, because it's like, when do we draw the line? If you say, 1/10 Gabonese, right? Oh, I'm a quarter Irish, right? And then you start breaking down all these different, like, when does this stop? When do you stop mentioning all the different things that you are? If you're Gabonese, if you're Irish, I'm 1/10 Gabonese, I'm 1/4 Irish. Like, is there a list? Does it stop? Do you just talk about where your parents come from? It's not an easy question, right? But ultimately, an individual has a choice, right? And you have to become empowered by knowing your own story, your own history, and you choose how to observe your roots and your past in a positive, loving way, and not doing it in a way that'll affect others, and honoring your roots, right? But doing it in a neutral way that doesn't make you feel kind of superior or anything like that, but something that makes you feel empowered about your connection and your roots. And we see a lot of the characters in this film have to figure that out for themselves, because their stories can be defined by who their parents are. But there's also a point in every kid's life where you decide who you want to be. It doesn't matter who your parents are or what your parents did. You choose who you want to be. I know that sounds hard to hear, but it's the truth. You have the choice to be whoever you want to be, no matter what your past is. So that's where race and ethnicity and identity become very complex and hard to balance with, and something that we have to reflect on and decide who we want to be. And that's also the problematic nature with defining ethnicity, because I stated on one aspect of it, it's like there's kind of a point where even ethnicity doesn't do a good job of kind of explaining your story. But it's up to you guys to decide how to become empowered. And the next section, we're going to talk about hostile architecture. All right, guys. So for this part, now we're going to talk about hostile architecture. Yeah, hostile architecture is back. In case you guys haven't heard it before, hostile architecture is a topic I'm very passionate about, especially when it comes to city design and design in general. Hostile architecture affects us a lot. And I did a video talking about it. You guys can check it out here. Check it out if you're interested in it, because I don't have time to go in deep within this topic, but I am definitely going to talk about it because this film has to do with it very, very heavily. So, hostile architecture, right? A simple way to see it and a simple way to understand the concept is that our architecture, everything around us, the building, the houses, our environments, our neighborhood, houses, streets, they create how we function in the world. So, how things around us, they affect us. So do your buildings, do your structures, do you have all the resources you need? Do the people in power, influence, and government make you feel like your needs are heard? Think about that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that's an example of hostile architecture. And we see this affect everybody in the film from the very beginning, where you see where our characters start, to the very end, where we see how where our characters end. And we see how the environment plays a big role and how it affects them. So I don't want to spoil it. So I don't want to get too specific with hostile architecture. But those who have seen the film, you're going to be like, oh, I get what he's getting at. And if you're like, I saw the film and I have no idea what he's talking about, please check out the video. It's going to break it down better, and it's going to be very specific, and it's going to be completely relevant to the film, I promise. So for the next section, we're going to get into this global unrest and these conflicts that are happening throughout the world, right? So there's a lot of frustration that's happening to this world. There's a lot of disillusionment. There's this ideal of what people wanted, and these ideals, these aspirations of how they wanted their futures and their lives to be. But power structures, governments, institutions are not fulfilling those promises. And that's government's job. That's the unspoken relationship between the government and the person, right? They're supposed to be working together. And we're seeing this more and more that that's not happening. So there's this unrest, there's this resistance, this protest that's happening in the world. I talk about this topic in Dog Day Afternoon. I mentioned it earlier, just mentioning it again. And so I go in deeper with those topics, but I'm going to still talk about it, but I'm going to reimagine it in a different way. I'm going to give you some specific recent conflicts that have been affecting the world and how we can see how there's a lot of dissolution that's represented in the film because of promises that weren't fulfilled and broken promises, and as well as broken promises that affected other countries. So an example of this that we can talk about this is a lot of chaotic world leaders, and people label them as autocrats that are affecting different countries, right? We have Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duarte in the Philippines. We have Yoon in South Korea creating government shutdowns. We have Georgescu in Romania. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And then we also see like literal protests that are happening in Bosnia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Serbia, Georgia, Hungary, Slovenia, Greece, Israel, Mozambique, South Korea, Turkey, formerly known as Turkey, and various conflicts and protests that are happening in the United States. There's election manipulations that are happening in Georgia and Mozambique. And that's chaotic, and of course, that's inhumane, right? Another example of things that are happening in other countries, we see authoritarian power grabs in regions such as Hungary, Israel, South Korea, and Turkey. Hungary has a ban on LGBTQ non-binary protests. It also has this heightened surveillance, very similar to China, of like monitoring everything that's happening to various devices and internet and whatnot. We see Israel's with Netanyahu's power centralization, his dismissal of security, and all the various things happening within Gaza. We see South Korea applying martial law, as mentioned earlier. We see Turkey having arrests on opposing people that have opposing views, such as various mayors. And then we see Serbia with different corruption scandals. And we see the neglect and very important issues, like Bosnia has a bunch of wreckage related to floods, and those things aren't being resolved. And we see train crash in Greece that left a lot of damage, and that's not getting resolved. We see mass shootings in Montenegro, that's not getting resolved. And we see this horrible nightclub fire that happened in Montenegro that created all these protests and all this conflict. All these things reflect people being disillusioned, heartbroken. The government is supposed to do their job and protect the people, because that's the unspoken exchange that happens with government, right? You pay your taxes, you do your part, you vote to make sure your rights are protected. But when your basic living rights can't be protected and where your humanity can't be protected, that creates a lot of conflict. And a lot of people are reflecting and feeling a sense of emptiness. And so that's where protest becomes a form of empowerment. And this film talks a lot about the deep themes of protest and resistance and kind of doing your part. And that's going to take us into our next section, which are symbols. For the most part in this section, and symbols, we're going to break down various people's names, because you can tell that the writers, the screenwriters, had very purposeful intentions when they named people all these various names. These are the various names we're going to talk about. The first name, and arguably the most important name in this entire film, is Perfidia. Perfidia is the core of this film. Her name is arguably the most important name in this film. Her name is based on the very famous Mexican folk song of Perfidia by Alberto Dominguez. It's a phenomenal song. Check out his version or check out the version by Los Panchos. It talks about like a broken heart and betrayal and just longing for love that can no longer be attained. And it's important, right? Because betrayal has a lot of different dimensions to it. Are betrayals intentional? Is it because the person needs to work on things within themselves? Is it because the betrayal had a higher purpose behind it? It's up to you guys to decide. If you guys seen the film, you know what I mean. If you guys haven't, well, betrayal is multidimensional. That's all I could say. And everyone is affected by what this character does, and everything else is affected by it. So in some ways, Perfidia's name and her actions create a hostile architecture, a hostile environment for everyone around her, and they have to work around everything that she's done. So that takes us to our next section, and the next important character, which is Willa. Willa is the daughter of Perfidia, and her name, it means will and desire. And that's kind of the story that we're here to follow as she's trying to reconnect with her family. What's her will? What's her desire? That's kind of the pulling force of the film as we see her path on her road to figure out what she wants to be and who she wants to become. Now, for the next person, we'll talk about her dad. We'll call him Bob in this situation. Bob comes from Robert. Robert means glory and bright. It's an interesting definition because glory can mean different things for different people. There's different forms of heroism that we probably do every day, whether we realize it. Whether it's just consistency, the discipline to do the necessary actions when you're supposed to, or doing the right things at the right time. Glory can be small things, glory can be big things. So, similar to the path that we see with Perfidia and Willa's character, we're also on the journey for Bob to find his form of glory. Now, for the next character, we have to talk about Deandra. Deandra's name means warrior. And to me, she's like the witness of the film. She's aware in this film, and she's put in all these challenging situations. She's a true warrior. Did she make the right call? That's up to you guys to decide. The next one we have is Sergio San Carlos. And what I chose to break down is more of his last name, the St. Carlos part. Sure, I'm sure it's a little jokely game on the various complex nature of Latin names and Abiyala names and whatnot. But I found a very interesting story, very compelling, about St. Charles Lwanga from Uganda. And he was a very important saint that, against all odds, and even when it was dangerous to be a Catholic, was able to empower and save a lot of people in his community. For the record, I'm not saying Catholicism is the only way and rock on Catholicism. That's not the point I'm getting at. I'm just breaking down an important saint that I feel like has a lot of relevant ties, and we see the different connections that are relevant with St. Charles Lwanga and St. Carlos. Carlos in Spanish. And so we see that like he was trying to do this possible thing, even though it wasn't a popular thing, but he was doing what he felt was right against these overwhelming odds. So that takes us to Carlos and Sergio. And we have the character of Lockjaw, which is pretty easy. Lockjaw, just kind of determined, strong-willed character that is refusing to let anything get into his way. Now, the final symbol that I want to talk about is the open road, because the open road is referred to here a lot in the film. And we have a lot of driving scenes, a lot of car chases, and a lot of scenes that are referring to the road. It's also paying homage to Westerns, since Westerns often pay homage to the open road. The concept of the Wild West and Westerns have to do with this open road, this idea of like chaotic freedom. And these elements tie into how the roads plays such an important role, since the journey of anybody who has some kind of role has to do with empowerment. We see various characters literally driving, walking, and try to find their own way and trying to figure out what their destiny is supposed to be. They're trying to figure out what they're meant to do and trying to figure out their purpose throughout the way when you have all these chaotic elements that are challenging them. And we also have crashes that happen. Crashes are going to happen in life. But how do you overcome them? How do you move? How do you move ahead? How do you try to find your way and navigate this way through the open road? Way or another, we have to be on an open road. We have to be on some kind of road and find our way. And the open road is not an easy path, but it's a path that has to be taken. And they're all done by a series of choices. And to tie in all the other points, that's where identity plays a role. That's where ethnicity plays a role. That's where this idea of the hostile architecture, the environment around us plays a role. And that's where these ideas of conflict, these ideas of protest and resistance play a role. We have all these things that are presenting themselves. How do we respond to them? How do we decide who we want to be? And that takes us to our last section, which is the conclusion and film review. So this film, the director calls the audience to kind of analyze the situation, to reflect on it. And it can become your own form of protest and your own form of resistance. I'm not saying you have to get your little protest sign and pitchforks and start being like angry. No. There's different forms of resistance. There's different forms of protest. One of the easiest things, like I talked about earlier, is compassion and tolerance, and just being okay with being around things, environments, people that are different from you, and having open ears and having an open heart and being okay with disagreeing and coming from a place of compassion and just listening to someone around you, whether it's a family member, a friend, or somebody that you've never met. Be open to it. Listen, understand. That's a small form of protest. It's a small form of resistance. And it plays a very beautiful and powerful role, and it can make some real powerful change. Another example of things that we can do is like a small physical act, like when it comes to like donating your money, maybe giving it to a charity, giving money to a homeless person, helping out in a homeless shelter, giving food to the homeless, maybe helping out some kind of rehab center, helping out some kind of cause that you're passionate about. Even if your cause isn't for necessarily a quote unquote revolutionary cause, it's still a cause. Whether you're playing card games just because you're super into it, whether you're reading comics, you're still forming an idea with community. And just be open to different people and be open to kind of forming different communities with different types of people. That's a very beautiful and empowering process. And that's a small change that can become a very positive ripple, and it can do your part into this massive, beautiful ocean of positivity. Compassion is really important. You can just have small forms of it. Another example you can do is just being compassionate to a friend, a family member, a stranger, just being like an ear, lend your ear to somebody so you can listen to them and just enjoy the person around you. Believe it or not, a form of protest and resistance is also having fun. Finding fun when it's hard to find fun because everything around you is telling you to be depressed and upset. That's a gift. Life's short. Have fun. Enjoy it. So, yeah, guys, do your part. Make things a little bit better. Make it positive and be compassionate and have an open heart. And if you are called to a big change, and if you are called to be informed and to want to know what's going on, then do it. Even being informed alone is such a powerful act of wanting to know what's going on around you to be empowered. You don't always have to physically act. Information is power, but of course you have to apply it. But you don't always have to apply it in a physical act. The power of conversations, interacting with people, and just knowing that you can't be fooled by deceptive information. Independent media sources, local news, local resources are often some of the best ways to kind of figure out that information if you're seeking it. And if you are trying to be a part of a revolutionary cause, more power to you. And I hope it's a positive one. It's something that's trying to affect some real change, and it's not coming in place from hatred. Because the last point on this is that nothing good ever comes from hatred, revenge, or anger. Doing something from a place of anger is never the right approach. Even if you were affected by it, even if it scarred you deeply, you should never respond to any type of rude act from a place of anger, because it's never going to have an appropriate response. Anger creates more anger, vengeance creates more vengeance, and that's not how you solve things. So don't. Come from compassion and love. And if you're not there yet, take your time. Work on yourself. Get the help you need, whether that's a psychologist, some kind of therapy, some kind of sport, some kind of outlet, journaling, music, art, whatever you can do to try to release that and try to kind of figure out and reflect on different things that are affecting you. You can do it, guys. Resist and empower yourself. Protest in your own way. The last part. Here we go. Film review. Yeah, this film was hard to review. I was fluctuating with different scores. I ended up landing on an 8.5. This film was great. It definitely didn't feel as long as it did. It's definitely an empowering journey. And you can't help but feel so conflicted about all the characters. But that's kind of some of the beauty and charm of the film too. We're kind of all these imperfect people trying to get by. Do you agree with all the people's actions? That's up to you guys. But the film did a great job of kind of empowering different characters and kind of leaving the audience with a lot of reflection. And it's very interesting how this film was supposed to potentially be made maybe 20 years ago, and how a lot of the themes still repeat themselves. So it kind of means that we have a lot of work to do. We got to be better. So yeah, guys, 8.5 out of 10. Thank you guys for checking out another AZ Ray video. That's been your breakdown from A to Z. If you want to hear any more from me, please leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your suggestions if there's a topic that you want to talk about. I'm open to it. Most of the time we end up talking about films. We can talk about anything you want. We had different types of video suggestions. Talked about witches, talked about Taylor Swift, wizardry, you name it. We will talk about it. Why not? Thank you guys for your time. Stay safe out there and have a good one.